All right, in this video, I want to talk about the Faustian will to power. And I really want to start it with a discussion on a book that is very fascinating that I am currently studying and have been studying for a couple months and still continue to learn new things to this day. It's called Decline of the West by Oswald Spengler. And if you haven't had the chance to read it, just look anywhere in this book. It is literally so fascinating, so breathtaking, and you just have to do yourself a favor and read it ASAP. Anyways, one of the chapters is dedicated to mathematics. And Oswald Spengler claims that the mathematician is like a philosopher and he's like an artist because, and Goth actually states this, where he says the mathematician is like a poet. And so Oswald Spengler says that the mathematician's role in a society is to convey and communicate the metaphysical ideas, the society's sensation, their sense of space and time and existence through numbers, and it's how they make sense of the world. And each society has its own sense of being, its own Dasein, its own sense of human condition. And I'm just going to take a note of this and say that the Arabs created algebra, the Greeks created geometry, and the West created calculus. And it's not necessarily that the culture has to necessarily create the mathematics, but it is the mathematics that is associated with that culture. So, for example, the Russians didn't create set theory, but in my opinion, in my belief, they are most associated with set theory and the groupings of things because they're a very communal society. But I'm going to be talking about the West mainly because that's the society I'm most familiar with. And so, to give an example of this, because the West invented calculus, I'm going to be utilizing calculus as the metaphysical, the sense to explain the West's sense of existence and being. And so basically, in calculus, you have this idea of a limit. And if you don't understand the idea of a limit, I have a video on my channel. It's a short video explaining what a limit is, and it's basically a brief summary. So if you don't understand it, please go check that out and then come back at this spot. But anyways, a limit is basically this concept that it's a concept that a quantity will go eternally to an infinitesimally small point without actually reaching that point. And it's a little bit confusing, but for example, it's like if I have a limit and it's approaching zero, it'll never actually be zero, but it will for eternity approach zero. So it'll get infinitesimally small. It'll be like 0.75, 0.5, 0.1, 0.01, 0.000001. It'll go to the smallest point you can possibly go to in perpetuity without actually becoming zero. And when I think of this, I think to myself that, isn't this the best example of the Western idea? I mean, this idea of never resting, especially in America. In American society, it's always work, work, work. It's like I guarantee that for most people, myself included, that they want to finish work in order to feel relaxed, in order to feel at rest, to say that they got the work done. But most of the time, when they get their work done, they're just rewarded with more work. So it's like you finish working only to meet more work. And so it's this idea that you're constantly approaching a goal, but you'll never actually reach the goal. It's it's exactly what Isaac Newton said when he said an object in motion will stay in motion. It won't rest unless another force actually stops that. But it's an object in motion will stay in motion. Another saying that is heard that is very recognizable to people is that the only constant is change. Like, think about that for a second. If you're constantly changing, like, first of all, like, it's very difficult to actually explain that. Like, how does that even make sense? But secondly, it's this idea of motion, this idea of change, this idea that you won't rest because, again, tying it back to calculus, it'll never actually become zero. It'll just go in perpetuity to the smallest finite amount without actually being zero. How is that not the idea of, how is that not a great, like the greatest representation of Western, the Western civilization's sense of time and being and of existence?